Well, hello everyone. This is another edition of Neema Parvini versus right-wing ideas. I am Neema Parvini, by the way, also known as Academic Agent. And in this series, I'm interrogating some difficult things that nobody ever seems to talk about. I'm trying to get beyond simply calling people racist or kind of low-level debates that go on and actually try to get to the heart of some of these issues and understand why some ideas win out and some ideas don't. I'm also, in the process of doing this series, kind of in a strange way justifying why I'm calling myself centre-left these days. Before I get going, today's topic is a spicy one. It's racial superiority. Not something I've ever advocated on this channel. Neither would I. But I'm going to be interrogating that and be attacking it from a realist point of view. But before we get there, pick up a course at the Academic Agency, promo code SHREDDER, watch this ad, and when I come back, we're going to tackle this one head on. It's promo code SHREDDER. World-class education denied to you by school, denied to you by woke university. Well, no more. Pick up your course today, 25% off all courses with promo code SHREDDER. That's SHREDDER. Buy it now. Alright, so yesterday I talked about ethnic narcissism. Today I want to talk about racial superiority. It's a slightly different thing, okay? So ethnic narcissism is basically just an in-group preference. You don't necessarily have to think you're better than everyone else, okay? Racial superiority is actually a doctrine where you assert that you're superior to other people. And usually this comes from empire. And in my reading around this topic over many years, it's hard not to notice that when racial superiority becomes the doctrine of a ruling class, things tend to go wrong. Things actually tend to go wrong from that point forward. Okay, I've got a book here. This is The Persians by J.M. Cook. And it's a lovely book, by the way. It talks all about the Persians and the ancient Persian Empire. One of the things it discusses in this book is how Cyrus the Great, from early on in his empire building process, was always very deft at bringing other ethnic groups on side, getting other leaders, ethnic leaders, to pledge allegiance to him and to the Persian Empire, and then to devolve power back down to them. So his strategy was to get some other leader, let's say whatever group it was, they have a little king, right? They have a mini king, and he says, well, okay, I'm still your king, but I pledge allegiance to the King of Kings, and this was the ruling strategy of Cyrus. Now, in the history of the Persian Empire, after Cyrus, successive later kings, or King of Kings, abandoned this strategy of Cyrus, and they were like, no, this is the Persian Empire. We are Persians. This gives us right to rule. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm being a little bit glib. Okay, but it's true that they started selecting for ethnic Persians. Okay, so the Persians became the explicit ruling class in some of these satrapies, where previously Cyrus had used local leaders. Instead now they were saying, no, it's actually just the Persians who are in charge. Okay, this has a habit of rubbing people up the wrong way, and it caused all sorts of problems in the Persian Empire. Eventually, of course, they were conquered by Alexander the Great, and he, having learnt from Cyrus the Great, decided to try to go back to the Cyrus way of doing things, the kind of devolution satrapy method. Unfortunately, And I've got a whole book on this as well. This is Seven Great Monarchies, Volume 3, written by, I think he's an Anglican cleric, George Rawlinson. Lovely book, beautiful maps and things. But in this book, I love it when you get the little, pull-out maps, things like that. What's notable about this book is that Rawlinson was actually writing this book at the height of the British Empire, and he was using these examples as lessons for the British at that time. And he was saying, well, look, the problem with the Seculids in Persia is that just as the Persians after Cyrus had abandoned the satrapy strategy and had started, they didn't entirely abandon satrapies, but they started selecting for Persians. The Seculids started selecting for Greeks. They started saying, well, look, Greeks, we have a right to rule. We're only going to put Greeks in charge. And lo and behold, yet again, they had revolts, and the Secular Empire did not last that much longer, and the Persians rose once more. Happens again and again in history. Those are just two examples, but there are many, many other examples of when an empire starts to get kind of drunk on hubris a little bit, drunk on the idea of itself. And what Rawlinson was doing in this book was basically warning the rulers of the British Empire to say, look, if we don't kind of moderate a little bit on this, we're going to get revolts everywhere. Okay, we need to include the kind of locals. And to be fair, the British at their height were quite deft at this way of using kind of local satrapy leaders to, so if you were a kind of person on the ground, you'd figure that you're actually still being run by your kind of native ethnic countryman type thing, only at some level above there was the British Empire. You were getting protection from the British Empire, something like this. The Roman Empire also did this, of course, as you can see in the Bible. So there are more extreme examples than these two from Persian history. Very recently, the Israeli government, people, if you want, have succumbed to a pretty ugly, I would say, supremacist ideology that has dehumanized their opponents in Gaza and has led to some pretty ugly scenes that a lot of people have seen. One of the reasons one of the things I really didn't like seeing was, I don't want to repeat what was in some of these things, but people dancing, people happy, people being disrespectful to people they've just killed, things like this, and kind of holding it up as an example of, this group's superiority to that group. I don't like to see that sort of thing. It's not very nice at all. And this sort of behaviour, this sort of lording it up of one group against another group, has a habit of rubbing up people the wrong way. Not only the group it is being done to, but also all of the other people looking on. And it's seen to a pretty large uptick in sympathy for the Palestinian cause as against the Israeli cause. For example, a recent Gallup poll showed, just in the past year, 46% of Americans were sympathetic to the Israeli cause versus 33% of the Palestinians. But then, over the course of the conflict, 42%, it flipped around. 42% sympathized with the Palestinians more than Israelis, that were as low in one New York Times poll as 17%, with a huge backlash, which you've seen all over your timelines over the past year. And I would say that a lot of this was down to the attitude, the superiority, the supremacist attitude of the Israelis. Other examples, of course, the Jews after Hitler in Nazi Germany. You can say what you want about that, but after World War II, the sympathy of the world was with the Jewish diaspora after a supremacist ideology tried to wipe them out. This is just this is just what has happened. Other examples, all those things that people bemoan as woke today. The treatment of blacks in America from slavery, treatment of South Asians in the British Empire, many other minority groups in the British Empire. It's got a habit of backlashing, like a kind of scorpion sting. So you can lord it up for a while, but then those ethnic resentments simmer, and then they kind of come back round when you're on the downswing. This is actually something that is discussed by John Bagot Glubb in his book The Fate of Empires. And it strikes me that it's generally unwise to adopt this kind of overt racial supremacist attitude as a ruling strategy because of that. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's in the ancient world or in recent history. You can see that its track record is not actually that good. The empires that lasted, Ottoman Empire as a good example, tended not to do this sort of thing. They tended to keep that millet or satrapy thing going. British Empire at its best, British Empire at its worst did the supremacist thing, and still people are talking about it to this day. Okay, so yeah, this is difficult topic that people don't really want to face, but it strikes me that it's generally an unwise thing, and I think that for a long time to come, lots of Israelis will probably regret the strategy they've adopted in the past few years, because people aren't going to forget that, just as people haven't forgotten all those other things I talked about. History's got a long memory for this sort of thing. So yeah, and then and this is something that Pareto talks about as well, that generally those people who get imbued with a sense of their own superiority, puffed up with hubris and so on, have a habit then of coming a cropper to low IQ groups. Okay, I mentioned yesterday the Arabs who swept across the Middle East, took Persia in 600 AD, something like that. The Persians of that time saw themselves as a superior civilization, more culture, higher tech, that had been an empire for a very long time, shipped L's to the marauding Arabs. The Mongols, like knife through butter all across China, all the way down, all the way across. I think the 23 million square kilometers I've got written here at the extent of the Mongol Empire. Now, the Mongols did not have a doctrine of racial superiority. They were not seen as being racial superiors either. This was not part of their thinking. What they were a very tight-knit group of warriors who had the spark that I talk about in Prophets of Doom, and they also had Asabaya, right, which is a concept from Ibn Khaldun I also talk about in that book. I think Peter Turchin talks about it. Maybe Joseph Tainter does too. I can't remember exactly who discusses it now. But this idea that you're a close-knit unit, okay? And Asabaya, as I discuss in that book, it doesn't develop through culture or civilization or education or high IQ or notions of superiority. It is actually fostered through hardship. It is fostered through, kind of living in a really harsh environment, whether it's the desert or the mountains, or you're coming from the frontier. You're coming in from the fringes. I guess these days we'd think about the Taliban or the Houthis or something. These are like proper barbarians, if you want to put it that way, who have a kind of superiority of spirit, but not a kind of racial doctrine. And this story repeats quite a few times in history. So, yes, and yeah, they were just, I guess you could describe them as better organized inferiors at the time. It seems weird to speak in these sort of terms, but if you look at it relatively at the time, if you were looking at tech, if you were looking at who's winning the civilization culture track or whatever, it would be all of the places that they were pillaging and burning down, etc. I would say another problem with racial superiority is that it is pointlessly alienating to potential ally groups. Now, alliances are usually formed tactically and in the short term. And if you kind of have this aggressive supremacist doctrine, generally it fosters unnecessary enemies. But if you're pragmatic and if you're neutral, you can navigate alliances in such a way where you can avoid costly confrontations. You're just basically picking fights you don't need to fight. And again, you can think of your own historical examples, but I would argue the Israelis now have probably bitten off more than they could chew. They've picked too many fights all at once, and again, it comes from a kind of hubristic supremacist mindset. Similar, you could argue about the mid-century Germans. They picked unnecessary fights back then. I realise opinions vary on that, but you can think of other examples too. So yeah, even as a kind of evolutionary strategy, being hyper-aggressive and picking fights just due to a haughty attitude generally isn't the best thing. Okay, and I think that will do on the racial. I did have other stuff here, but I think that's the kind of the meat of it, really. And yeah, I mean, at the moment, if you have a look at the current situation, it seems to me impolitic. It seems to me kind of a little bit impulsive. It seems to me poor strategy in general to be alienating other groups at this moment. Now, I will say that in my time of being online, very few people who call themselves quote-unquote ethno-nationalists tend to actually have a racial... They tend not to go for this cartoonish racial supremacist doctrine. Very few of them actually do this. You'll see it kind of like grug tier things. I would say the people who go for this most actually are those Hasbro type kind of people who are trying to get you to support Israel and trying to appeal to these other kind of notions of racial superiority. I'll talk more about that. I'm going to do a later episode on what I'm calling low IQ bigotry. And I think that those Hasbro types, or those people who are overtly or covertly working to get you basically to support Israel through racism, okay, those people are... They're kind of trying to get you to engage in an impulsive gruggery, okay, a kind of allowable bigotry because they want something else out of you. So yeah, I think that'll do on today. Let me know what you make of this. I don't want to make them too long, these episodes. I'm trying to articulate the basic problems as best I can, and then we'll see what sort of pushback I get, if any pushback. Maybe this will just be non-controversial. Maybe I'm speaking so much sense that everybody will agree with me already. But we will see. But as I was saying, most ethno-nationalists don't actually, like in the interest of fairness, I'm not accusing lots of people of having this doctrine, most of those people actually tend to say things like, well, every person in their own homelands. We're not actually asserting, a supremacist doctrine. We just want equal treatment for all the peoples of the world. Now, there could be a utopian element in that, and I'll get to that tomorrow when I talk about nationalism and some of my issues with nationalism and why I've never called myself a nationalist. But today, racial superiority. Let me know what you make in the comments. Pick up a course at the academic agency, promo code SHREDDER, 25% off, and I'll see you then.
If you liked this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can join the channel for thousands of hours of past shows in the archive and hundreds of videos. If you have any questions, you can leave a super chat or a super thanks, and I'll be sure to pick it up during my weekly office hours, which run every Tuesday afternoon. I also provide courses at the academic agency, which I encourage people to buy. Thousands of students now have taken the Trivium to improve their skills in writing, logic, and rhetoric. Just 3 of many courses available. Buy it now. But most importantly of all, friends, get out. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can join the channel for thousands of hours of past shows in the archive and hundreds of videos. If you have any questions, you can leave a super chat or a super thanks, and I'll be sure to pick it up during my weekly office hours, which run every Tuesday afternoon. I also provide courses at the academic agency, which I encourage people to buy. Thousands of students now have taken the Trivium to improve their skills in writing, logic, and rhetoric. Just 3 of many courses available. Buy it now. But most importantly of all, friends, get out.